Right, we now come to the urgent question. Robert Jenrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Justice if he will make a statement on the government's reported plans to further restrict the right to trial by jury in almost all cases.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this government inherited an emergency in our criminal courts, with record and rising caseloads, leaving victims behind each and every one of those cases facing agonising delays, waiting to see justice done, while some defendants hope their accusers simply give up on justice. That is why the government asked Sir Brian Leveson, a preeminent jurist and one of our most experienced judges, to undertake an independent review, a once-in-a-generation review of our criminal courts. We have been carefully considering his recommendations and agree that a crisis of this scale requires bold action to get the system moving and to deliver swifter justice for victims. No final decisions have been made on exactly how to take forward the blueprint that Sir Brian and his expert panel has set down, and I suggest that the House waits for that response. But let me be clear, jury trials will always be a cornerstone of British justice. This government will do whatever it takes to protect the fundamental right to a fair trial. The great British justice system, with all of its traditions, would never let victims wait, in some cases, 4 years for justice. There is indeed, Mr. Speaker, a clash of ideas between this side of the House and the opposition. We are on the side of modernisation, of defending our values and of swifter justice for victims, whilst they're prepared to watch the system rot, not offering any answers. The old adage rings true that in the current crisis, justice delayed is justice denied. The system was simply not designed for a scenario where there are tens of thousands of victims facing agonising delays for justice. The vast majority of cases in our courts are already heard without juries. Around 90% of all criminal cases are dealt with robustly, fairly, by magistrates with no jury. The country deserves meaningful reforms which back victims, back modernisation and back fairness over those gaming the system, to speed up the courts and get victims the swifter justice that they deserve, resolving the court backlog and ensuring fair justice. As I've said, we intend to respond to the first part of Sir Brian's review very soon, so the House, I'm afraid, will have to wait a little longer for that response.
No more leaks just yet. Right. Robert Jenrick, Shadow Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this government lurches from one outrage to another. Yesterday, the Chancellor shredded her promises and dropped a £26 billion tax bomb on working Britain. Meanwhile, we learnt that the Justice Secretary is plotting to discard centuries of jury trials without so much of a by your leave. And where is the Justice Secretary to answer for this? Do we need to send out a search party to Savile Row in case he's gone suit shopping again this morning? Or perhaps he couldn't face up to the embarrassment that he is now destroying the very principles he once championed. Jury trials are fundamental to the justice system. They're fundamental to our democracy, and we must protect them. Not my words. Those of the Justice Secretary himself. And this time, he was right. There is wisdom in 12 ordinary citizens pooling their collective experiences of the world. But now he's in government. He's doing the complete opposite. He blames the court backlog. But if the courtrooms standing empty this year were used, the backlog would be down by 5,000 to 10,000 cases. He pleads poverty on law and order. But yesterday the Chancellor came here and found £16 billion more to spend on benefits. The truth is the Labour Party just don't think ordinary people are up to it. They don't trust them with these decisions. Give away the Chagos Islands, shackle us to the ECHR, scrap jury trials, all because lawyers know best. And when the Justice Secretary is summoned here to the People's House, what does he do? He cowers. He cowers away. Well, the people who make up juries, the British people, they won't wear it anymore. So I've one simple question for the minister he sent in his stay. Will she protect what is fundamental to our democracy? Or will she stand by as the Justice Secretary casually casts aside centuries of English liberty?
Minister.
How extraordinary, Mr. Speaker. He claims to care about the rule of law. He claims to care about ancient legal traditions. Mr. Speaker, this is the same Shadow Justice Secretary that denigrates our independent judges, that denigrates our legal community standing up for rights. I've already said, and I'll say it again, the right to a jury trial for our most serious cases will remain a fundamental part of our British legal tradition. But since he is so fond of quoting our ancient principles, quoting Magna Carta, let me remind him of what is our constitutional right. What Magna Carta says is, to no one will we delay right or justice. The right to a swift and prompt trial is a fundamental ingredient of fairness. And when you have the crisis that we inherited from the party opposite, a backlog now of some 80,000 cases, behind each and every one of those cases, an actual victim, somebody accused of a crime, we are denying in the current system a fair trial because as victims, as witnesses, pull out of the process, as is increasingly happening, that is denying fairness. Today, a victim of rape, and I say this with the pin that I'm wearing as we stand in 16 days of activism against violence against women and girls. A woman reporting a rape today in London to be told that her trial may not come on till 2029 to 2030. That is not justice at all. That is a consequence of allowing the Crown Court backlog to spiral out of control and doing nothing, offering not a single answer. That is not upholding the right, the fundamental British constitutional right to a fair trial. It is exactly the opposite. And I certainly, for one, as part of this government, am not prepared to sit idly by. It's why we've gripped the crisis, making record investment in sitting days, extending magistrates' court sentencing powers, investment in legal aid, and of course asking one of our finest jurists, Brian Leveson, to conduct an independent review to provide us with a blueprint for how we get out of this mess. The party opposite, they like to call themselves the party of tradition, the party of law and order, and yet they presided over a justice system in which the British public can no longer have confidence. I'm afraid that I'm not prepared to let victims down. This Labour government is finally putting victims first. It's why we are going to consider very carefully Sir Brian's recommendations. It's why we will undertake to implement his blueprint, which takes as its fundamental premise this, that the system is broken. There is no one in this House, there is no one in the community that represents victims, there is no one in the legal community, no judge, no one operating and working hard in the system to keep it going, who thinks that the system isn't broken. We have to fix it. And what Sir Brian Leveson tells us is that investment alone will not fix it. We need investment coupled with structural reform and modernisation. That is exactly the blueprint that this government will bring forward. Because, as I said, we believe in the right to a fair trial. We believe in British justice. And unlike the party opposite, we will deliver swifter justice for victims.
Chair of the Select Committee, Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister's right to say that we can't go on as we are with 80,000 plus cases in the backlog and growing 4-year delays in serious cases. And she's also right to say there's nothing sacred about jury trial for any particular level of offence. But if the Lord Chancellor is thinking to go beyond Sir Brian Leveson's proposals, he will need to produce some clear evidence as to why that is necessary and why that does not offend our system of justice, of which we are all still very proud. And that's not only about more serious offences, but if the leak is to be believed, it's also about extending magistrates' court powers beyond the 12 months they've only just gone up to, and a massive extension of judge-only trials. So I appreciate the Minister may not be able to answer all those questions today, but when are we going to hear those answers, and when are we going to get the response to Sir Brian's report?
Minister? He's absolutely right that, of course, I will not be commenting on a leaked document. No final decisions have been taken. What I can say is that we are giving very careful consideration to Sir Brian's blueprint. We're giving very serious consideration to the conclusions that he draws that the current system, as the Right Honourable Gentleman says, is broken, that we need structural reform, and that requires that we countenance the idea of judge-only trials, that we countenance a thorough review of what magistrates' court sentencing powers should be, and of course that we ask the question which Sir Brian invites us to ask, which is, when is it proportionate to have a jury trial with all the rigour but all the expense and delay that can entail? Is it right that we ask somebody accused of stealing a bottle of whiskey to be ahead of the queue of the rape victim waiting for her jury trial? Is that right? That is the question that he poses, and that is the question that when we come forward with our detailed plans, which need to be considered as a whole, that will be necessary for this House to consider.
Jess Brown for the Liberal Democrats spokesperson.
Mr. Speaker, the leaked memo from the Ministry of Justice revealing plans to rip up our criminal justice system is particularly surprising given the Deputy Prime Minister himself has stated jury trials are fundamental. In a report he wrote, he called jury trials a success story of our justice system. Juries are not the cause of the court backlog. That was complacency from the former government and a failure to grip the issue by this government, totally failing the victims that are currently waiting. So will the Minister clarify if this proposal that's come out of the MOJ is a suggested temporary emergency measure or a permanent erosion of our criminal justice system? Does she share my concern that the OBR is showing a real-term cut of 3% a year to the MOJ's capital budget after the budget yesterday? And does she agree with the Deputy Prime Minister's diagnosis from opposition that the government should pull their finger out and acquire empty public buildings across the country to clear the backlog?
Minister.
Well, as she heard me say a moment ago, the constitutional right that we guarantee every citizen in this country who comes before our criminal courts is the right to a fair trial. And where victims are waiting for years for their day in court, right now justice is not being served. When the Secretary of State made those comments, it was obviously in a very different context, not one where the party opposite had allowed the backlogs to run out of control. And as I said earlier, and I said clearly, the right to a jury trial and the jury trial will always be a cornerstone of the British justice system. That is not going to change. It doesn't change in Sir Brian's report, where he recommends the restriction of jury trial in certain cases, and it's not going to change in the plans that the government is bringing down. She's right that what we need is a combination of structural reform and investment, and we are making that investment. We've increased capital investment in court maintenance and buildings to £148.5 million. We're opening new criminal courts, for example, in central London, in Blackpool and in other parts of the country. We've got to build system capacity, more judges, more lawyers, more staff to man those cases. But ultimately, our focus must be laser focused on the need to deliver swifter justice for victims. And in order to do that, we will be bringing forward plans, very careful plans, which protect people's rights and protect that right to a fair trial when we come forward with our response in due course to Sir Brian Levison's recommendations.
Look forward to the courts opening good shortly at some point then. Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 14 years of the previous government, many in Oldham feel that justice has left town. Our county court closed, our magistrate court closed, police station after police station closed as well. And today, for a town of 250,000 people, there's not a single custody cell that is in operation. Now, we're looking to address that with the Mayor of Greater Manchester and bringing forward plans for a new police station with custody cells. But ideally, we want to see a justice centre where courts can be brought back to Oldham so that magistrates can take the bench in the town where justice can be served and can be seen to be served.
The failure for the North.
Well, what he's described in graphic detail and the way that justice has visibly eroded in his town is the result of 14 years of Conservative failure, austerity and fundamental neglect of our justice system. What we are doing in so many areas is rebuilding and restoring confidence that the British public can have in our justice system. We inherited two crises. One, we inherited a prison system running red hot, How irresponsible, the so-called party of law and order, allowing prisons to be full so that dangerous criminals wouldn't have a prison place. And the second crisis, perhaps less visible but no less serious, the crisis that I'm referring to today, the crisis in our criminal justice system, in our courts, where victims are waiting longer and longer for justice. What he says is that our constituents deserve to see visible justice. They deserve to see that when they report a crime, it doesn't take years for that to come to trial, but that it happens within months, it happens swiftly, so that people can see the consequences of their actions. That, by the way, also reduces recidivism, and that is why we are going to do whatever it takes to bring down the backlogs.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
I've served as a young barrister in criminal courts, and I've served on a jury, and I can say I was deeply impressed by the care that people from all walks of life on the jury took to consider the evidence. Actually, they were better than the barristers in many ways. I can understand where she's coming from, but COVID was a one-off event. I just ask anybody sitting here, if you're a previous good character and you are accused of what might seem to be a minor crime, for instance, one of our colleagues years ago was accused of shoplifting, you wander out of a shop and you're accused of and you go to court, your whole career, your whole reputation could be destroyed. Surely the minister must accept that certainly if you are a person of previous good character, you must have a right to jury trial. This is 1,000 years of history. This is the greatest offence against totalitarianism. We must never throw it away, and we should consider very carefully before we proceed.
Melissa.
I thank him for his question, and to use that kind of Latin quip, if you like, that barristers are fond of using, we're ad idem. I agree with jury trials. I agree that they bring something of value, something of deep value to our legal tradition. It's why, as I've said, they will remain a cornerstone of British justice for the most serious crimes. But we have to have an air of realism about the context here. Currently, 90% of cases are dealt with quite properly, quite fairly, quite robustly, without a jury trial. That is the norm. We don't have jury trials in our civil system. Again, that is the norm. In reality, only 3% of cases are heard by a jury. The question is about proportionality. And where you have the sorts of offences that he refers to, what I would say is that we need to treat all defendants, anybody accused of a crime, equally. What we must ensure is that we address the crisis that we have today, where those who have suffered some of the most serious crimes are waiting years for justice. We've got to do what it takes, and part of that is, as Sir Brian Leveson contends for, is that we need a proportionate use of one of our most precious commodities, which is our jury trial. I agree, it is a good thing, and we need to use it and preserve it for the most serious cases.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, isn't it extraordinary the Conservative Party is still pretending to be the party of law and order, despite being the party that slashed police numbers, that hollowed out our criminal justice system and failed victims time and time and time again? And Mr. Speaker, in the years prior to COVID, the Conservatives artificially capped the number of sitting days, with allocations declining from 109,000 in 2015-16 to a record low of 83,150 in 2019-20, the year leading up to the pandemic. So isn't it the case that this reckless decision led to a growing court backlog even before COVID struck?
My right honourable friend is right. We inherited record and rising backlogs. COVID was a contributory factor, but it wasn't the only factor. Years of underinvestment, years of neglect contributed to the delay. And indeed, the demand coming into the system, which, by the way, continues to increase, partly because our police are making more arrests, there are more charging decisions, and that's not a bad thing. Yeah. But the system is simply buckling under the weight of that demand. And unlike those on the benches opposite, what I'm not prepared to do is to sit idly by, because, as I said, behind each and every one of those 80,000 cases, roughly, that sit in our backlog is a victim, is somebody accused trying to clear their name, living under a cloud, lives on hold, psychological torture, and ultimately justice is not being served. So we've got to do whatever it takes to get it down.
Neil Chester.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The crisis in our criminal justice system is not because of jury trials, it's because of inefficiencies in the system, and it's a lack of advocates who are able to prosecute and defend these trials. They're not my words, they're the words of the Bar Council and the Criminal Bar Association. So when will the government engage with them and not rely solely on Sir Brian's report in order to get the cornerstone of our justice system, which is the jury style, maintained whilst improving the inefficiencies in the criminal justice system?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. He will know that I engage with the Bar Council, with the Criminal Bar Association and with a range of stakeholders on a regular basis. And in fact, they agree with me that the system is broken. Indeed, hard-working criminal barristers, whether they prosecute or whether they defend, are experiencing a sapping of morale as they go into crumbling buildings presided over on their watch, inefficient trials which crack, trials which are coming 3-4 years after they were reported, with witnesses pulling out on the day. All of that is deeply, deeply demoralising. And indeed, there is a huge degree of consensus between ourselves and the direction of travel and those at the Bar Council and the Criminal Bar Association. We've got to address inefficiencies, of course, and that's why Sir Brian Leveson and his independent reviewers are looking at inefficiencies and productivity in the system. When Part 2 comes forward, we'll be taking those recommendations equally seriously and looking to implement them.
Emma Foodie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2014, 8% of those on trial for an either-way offence opted for a jury trial, whereas by 2022 this had more than doubled to 17%. Now, at the same time, we know that the backlog was growing for the Crown Court, we know that there's delays in those cases then going to trial, and we know, therefore, that there are more people dropping out and being denied their justice and their day in court. Is it not clear that some people are gaming the system to be able to deny victims justice?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. I visited Wood Green Crown Court last week, which has some of the deepest backlogs in the country, and I met with judges and barristers there, and what they said is it is not uncommon to watch career criminals opting for a jury trial when their matter could be heard in the magistrates, which have sufficient sentencing powers, literally laughing in the dock. Why? Because they know that not just this Christmas, but the Christmas after that and the one after that, they will still be with their families without having faced trial, in the hope that witnesses pull out, the trial cracks, and that, frankly, justice isn't served. There are people gaming the system. This is the consequence of the delays. This is why we have to do whatever it takes to fix it.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, another day, and we have another leak from this government. The Minister says that no final decision has been made, so we just have speculation. She suggests that we wait, Mr. Speaker. So why doesn't she use this time to reflect on some of the comments from this side of the chamber and bring back some of those examples of courts that we used during COVID to speed up the process so that people continue to have that right to a trial by jury?
She's right that we need to increase capacity, and it's why, as a government, since we came into power, we've increased the number of sitting days by over 5,000 from her own party. We are sitting record sitting days. The fact is, though, Mr. Speaker, is that you've got to build system capacity. You've got to have enough judges, you've got to have enough prosecutors, you've got to have enough court ushers, you've got to have enough translators. You've got to build system capacity. We need more magistrates. We're embarking on an ambitious programme to recruit more magistrates. All of that has to happen. Unlike her party, we are investing in the system. We are looking to bring more courtrooms back into use. But ultimately, as Sir Brian Leveson reminds us time and time again, that alone, spending our way out of trouble, is not going to fix the system. One of their own, Alex Chalk, former Lord Chancellor, said the system will become irrecoverable unless we act. Unlike them, I am prepared to do so.
Tim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 2017 Lammy Review found that jury trials to be the only part of the justice system consistently free from racial bias, and with only 12% of justice from ethnic backgrounds. These proposals risk deepening disproportionality and undermining the confidence in the justice system. So can the Minister explain how the public and ethnic minorities have trust in this new Crown Court decision, for which there is no evidence that this will even work to address the backlog?
She is right to highlight the issue of racial disparities right across our criminal justice system. Sadly, there is nothing new about that issue, which, as I said, runs through from issues with policing, with prosecutorial practices, and of course, our courts are not entirely free of that. Equality before the law, that principle is fundamental to public confidence in our justice system, and any differential treatment on the grounds of race or ethnicity is unacceptable. Regardless of which options we take forward to tackle the crisis, that principle, equality before the law, will run through them, and I can assure of that.
Quod erat demonstrandum. Yesterday it was made abundantly clear that the government's priority is the recipient of benefits, way ahead of any consideration of victims, wasn't it?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. Was it a question? Was it a statement? Was it a rant? I think it does display a serious lack of seriousness. What we've got is a backlog with 80,000 cases, each and every one of those cases a real victim lying behind them, a victim of rape, as I've said in London today, reporting her case, being told she's got a trial in 2030. Does he think that we should just sit back? Does she think that any responsible government would take receipt of an independent review, detailed, carefully considered, evidence-based, and simply say, oh, we'll just leave it on the shelf? Forget it. We are going to respond to it, we're going to implement it, we're going to act, because we care about one thing: swifter justice for victims. I'm sorry he can't say the same.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister said, justice delayed is just justice denied. Yet we have almost a backlog of 80,000 people, and people facing a rape trial can wait up to 4 years, rape victims. Does she agree with me that we need a system that puts victims at the heart of our approach? And does she agree with me that therefore we need to get on with the job of reform?
He's spot on. I met with a victim of child sexual abuse just the other day. He described to me the long wait for his very serious matter. They laugh. I struggle when I'm talking about...
Sorry. Father House, you're better and bigger than that. Thank you, Minister. I feel so strongly about it.
Well, so do I. I spoke to a victim of child sexual abuse who had waited years for his day in court. A couple of weeks before his trial date, he was told and given the devastating news that the trial had been adjourned by another year. I regret to say he sought to take his own life upon hearing that. Luckily, his attempt didn't work. But if you ever needed a more graphic illustration of the weight that these intolerable delays place on victims, on real people's lives, then that is it. And that is why we have to do whatever it takes to bring down these backlogs.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Trial by jury is a fundamental principle of our justice system, engendering confidence amongst the British people. We all want, Minister, to bring the backlogs down. But can I urge the government, focus on the efficiencies, focus on the technology, focus on additional investment, because there is a fundamental point that I ask the Minister, is she and the government aware? Victims and the British people have more confidence in juries' decisions than the decisions of judges.
He's right that we do need to focus on efficiencies. We do need to focus on use of technology. It's why the Ministry of Justice is looking at greater use of AI for transcription tools, case summarisation, all to help us bring down these delays. What we have to guarantee to everybody in this country is that if they come before our criminal courts, they will have a fair trial. As I've said, 90% of people who come before our criminal courts are currently tried without a jury, and that is done fairly and it's done with integrity. I stand by that what we've got to do is offer people a fair trial. Waiting 4 years for a trial simply isn't fair. So we've got to get the balance right, but he's right. Efficiency, investment and structural reform. That's what will get the backlogs down.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Minister's serious approach to dealing with this difficult issue. Mr. Speaker, like yourself and many other members, my inbox is full of heartbreaking casework. Some of the most heartbreaking casework is from victims of crime who are anguished and hurt and deprived of justice because of delays to the system and how it's broken.
Most of those come from delays that started under the last government. So I think they have some brass neck when it comes to talking about a broken system for us. Can the Minister confirm to me that when she considers the reforms and the government looks at them, we will put those victims in my constituency first. We will seek to end the delays, and we'll have a motto in our government, which is that a justice system broken is justice denied, and it's our job to fix it.
I couldn't put it better myself. It is those victims that I have in mind every day when I come into work, flip open the virtual or real red box and think, what is it that we can do? What lever can we pull to pull down these backlogs? And I will be bearing their stories in mind as we approach this with the seriousness that it deserves.
Speaker, Minister of State is a very distinguished lawyer, so I'm very surprised to hear of her selective interpretation of the Magna Carta this morning. She references Article 40 or Clause 40 entitling us to access to justice, and I accept that, but can I encourage her to reread Clause 39, which underpins the fundamental rights of all of our constituents? Is this not another case of a continuation of Labour's constitutional vandalism?
Minister.
Nothing could be further from the truth. And the way in which I approach this question is one in which we are about protecting people's rights to a fair trial. There is no right in our Constitution to a jury trial. It's not there. But jury trials are a fundamental and important part of our legal tradition, and they will remain so after any reforms that are brought forward. That simply does not change. 90% of people are tried without a jury, and that is fairly done. So what we need to guarantee is a fair trial, and I'll be mindful both of our legal traditions descending from Magna Carta and through many constitutional documents since as we approach these reforms.
Steve Rich.
I recently met my local CPS in Exeter who informed me that, as has already been discussed, defendants who have the choice often choose a jury trial in order to delay their case to gain the system. Because of this, for adult rape cases, 10% are stopped after a defendant has been charged because the victim no longer supports the prosecution due to the long delays in their case. With the backlog at 78,000 and rising victims, they're waiting years. Does the Minister agree that we do need this bold action to get the court system back on its feet?
He's absolutely right, and I think one of the most poignant and difficult areas is in the context of rape and serious sexual offences, which are so in our minds in these 16 days. Rape Crisis produced a report which was published last week in which they reported that 1 in 3 rape victims face delay to their trials. I'm told that 60% of rape victims are pulling out of the process because they simply cannot live with the spectre of that trial hanging over them, and they doubt that justice will ever be done. And so what's the consequence of that? It's not just heartbreaking for them, but it means that justice isn't served. Yeah. And that's something that I don't think anyone in this House can abide.
Yeah.
With the government's attitude to migrants now expanding the political space for the racist far right, is the Minister not concerned that building a toolkit for authoritarians out of digital ID, police facial recognition, and now cutting jury trials for apparently all charges that might be associated with dissent is incredibly dangerous and something that we wouldn't expect from a Labour government, which should be protecting our rights instead?
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, I utterly reject the premise of that question. First of all, she will have to wait, as other members of the House, for the government's detailed response to Sir Brian Levison's recommendations and which cases will be affected by those reforms. But I utterly reject the suggestion that this is somehow an authoritarian gambit. Far from it. I cannot think of anything more progressive than doing what it takes to salvage the British justice system and guarantee fair trial, which is currently being undermined as a result of the underinvestment by the last government, as a result of these backlogs. I'm ensuring that we work towards guaranteeing fair trial for every victim of crime in this country. I cannot think of anything fairer and more progressive than that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Is the government not concerned that the judiciary tends to be privately educated and white, and that's very different to the composition of juries, therefore not representative of the modern day United Kingdom.
Well, our judiciary is one of the prides of this country. Their independence, their integrity is something that provides, I think, one of the pillars of rule of law in this country. That doesn't mean that they always get it right. It doesn't mean that they are beyond reproach. But what they are all subject to is the principle of acting without fear or favour. They undergo comprehensive judicial training, which includes, rightly so, rigorous training in bias, including racial bias. And by the way, whilst we're at it, let me mention that in our magistracy, so reflective of principles of local and democratic justice, we are moving towards a more diverse magistracy, so that in London, one of our most diverse cities, we currently have over 30% BAME magistrates. We need to go further, but I can assure him that whether it's our judges, our magistracy, or indeed the involvement of juries for our most serious cases, that democratic element will always be retained.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister rightly calls out the issues of rape victims. She might want to have a word with her friend, the Mayor of London, who's closing down police stations so there's nowhere for people to report. I recently visited Harrow Crown Court, which is temporarily placed in Hendon Magistrates Court while the building is rebuilt in Harrow. And I asked the judge there, why are the courts all empty? There was only one court operational. And he said to me, the biggest problem is finding lawyers for defendants to enable these trials to actually take place. So while she's considering this, can she look at the investment that needs to take place to encourage lawyers to take on criminal justice cases? That's really good point.
Well, I thank him for that question. I know that we both look forward to the reopening of Harrow Crown Court in Harrow. I would also push back on the suggestion that the Mayor of London hasn't, in fact, led on tackling violence against women and girls in our city, greater numbers of policing, and a real drive on that. In relation to the question he asks about supporting the sustainability of lawyers to be able to both prosecute and defend these cases, the government has already announced an injection of £92 million for criminal legal aid solicitors who defend these cases. We're making that investment. We're looking to see if we can go further, particularly in relation to the advocates. So we are making that investment. It's a shame that his government didn't make that investment a little earlier. We might be in a rather different position today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under this Labour Justice Department, we've had leaked prisoners and now leaked documents. When we had leaked prisoners, the Justice Secretary came here, demanded a review, put in new checks, and made sure that he was personally going to look into it. Given we've had leaked documents, what steps are going to be taken? Can she rule out the fact that it wasn't leaked by any special advisors or ministers? And will there be a leak inquiry to find out how this information got out from the department?
Well, as he knows, I'm not going to comment on leaks. I'm not going to comment on the circumstances of leaks. What I can say is no one was more irritated by the timing of this leak than me. And what I will also say is that this issue, the issue of our Crown Court backlog, the impact that is having on victims, this is a debate that rightly has been well ventilated in this House. It's why we asked Sir Brian Leveson to conduct his expert review, to engage, to consult with a wide range of stakeholders. And we've been very open about the issues that are needed to have that debate. But in terms of leaks, I'm simply not going to comment.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is, I think, the third attempt by successive governments to try and reduce the right to trial by jury. It is a fundamental right in our system. It should not be undermined, and it should not be undermined because the government has a current and temporary, hopefully temporary, problem about capacity. In answer to the member for Liverpool Riverside, she recognised that the Lammy inquiry of 2017 recognised that jury trials were actually more objective than judge-only trials, less likely to be racially biased and likely to give a fairer outcome. Is she really content that we should be walking away from the jury trial system because of the current problems? Isn't the answer instead, as other colleagues have raised, to invest more in the system to deal with, she's quite right, the appalling backlog that's there?
Well, we are making that investment. We're making that record investment in sitting days, in our lawyers, in legal aid. We're investing in technology. But as Sir Brian Leverson's review concludes, investment alone isn't going to fix the problem which, as I said, is undermining the fairness of those trials. By the time those jury trials are being heard, in many cases, the evidence is years old. In many cases, witnesses' minds are no longer fresh in their recollection of the events. People are pulling out of the process. That is fundamentally unfair. It is also not at all progressive, because we cannot guarantee that fundamental right to a fair trial. So it's right that we look, as Sir Brian Leveson has indicated, both at structural reform and investment to ensure that we can guarantee a fair trial and, rightly, equality before the law for all.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for coming here today to answer this urgent question? I've taken note of what she said, and if I may quote it back to her, a swift and prompt trial is a fundamental principle of fairness. 3 to 4 years delay is deeply demoralising, and justice delayed is justice denied. So can I ask how she squares that position with her support of the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill?
Well, he's right to quote those things back at me. Those are the headlines of the arguments that I'm making this morning in relation to this UQ, in relation to the backlogs in our England and Wales criminal courts. In relation to my support for that bill, it is a fair piece of legislation and one which I stand by.
And Davis.
Mr Llefarydd, at the end of December 2024, there were 11,850 outstanding cases at our Magistrates' Court and 2,663 outstanding cases at Crown Court in Wales. Of course, 23 Crown and Magistrate courts have been closed across Wales since 2010. Does the Minister agree that fewer courts and distances away from communities are significant factors in reduced and delayed access to justice, and this must be addressed as a priority?
I thank her for her question, and one of the things that I pay particular attention to are the different regional disparities in this Crown Court crisis and in the delays, and we have to look at different regions and see what the right solutions are for them. But she's absolutely right. In particular, in Wales, one of the issues is the distances that we're asking magistrates to travel in order to perform what are, frankly, an amazing public service. The fact that we have this army of local volunteers who both reflect their community and serve their community is really important. It's something I've engaged with very closely with Welsh magistrates on. But she's absolutely right. What we're going to need to bring down these backlogs, again, I won't grow sick of saying it, investment, structural reform and modernisation. If we get all three, then regardless of where you live in England and Wales, we will be bringing down the backlogs and we will be getting swifter justice for victims.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Mr. Speaker, does the Minister accept that failed asylum seekers are exploiting these delays in the Crown Court? And would she therefore consider restricting the right of jury trial so that only British citizens can enjoy it?
Well, as he knows, asylum seekers' cases and appeals are heard in the Immigration and Asylum Tribunal, not in our criminal courts. And there we are not only making investment in immigration legal aid so that those cases can be heard at a swifter rate, we are sitting at close to maximum capacity sitting days to process those cases. But when we talk about swifter justice for victims in our criminal courts, that's got to be our real focus and the real focus of the debate today.
Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Minister has spoken about the importance of swift and fair justice. I feel that this will set a very dangerous precedent that the state will become addicted to, and I sincerely hope that government does not go down this path. But if the government does go down this path, can I urge the Minister to ensure that this is only in place for the duration required to clear the backlog, that it is then abandoned and does not become a central tenet of the justice system?
Very good point.
Well, he's right to say that this has been prompted by a crisis, and that crisis that we inherited from the previous government is acute indeed. As we speak, day on day, month on month, that backlog heads in the wrong direction. So as I've said, what we need to do is whatever it takes to bring it down to a sustainable level. And the way we'll do that is by investing in the system, it's by structural reform and modernisation. But we have a very long way to go. There is no doubt that we have a mountain to climb, and it's only when we're in a sustainable position that we can say that we are delivering swift justice for victims that we can revisit whether this is right for our country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Trial by jury may be more expensive than trial by judge and magistrates. But does the Minister agree with me that, as we've heard today, this goes beyond just finances, because the right to a fair trial by an impartial jury is fundamental. It is essential to safeguarding fair justice and must be protected for all cases.
Well said.
The constitutional right that British people have is the right to a fair trial. And when they are waiting years for their day in court, when they are seeing some defendants game the system, where they're seeing some defendants whose trial could be heard. I believe in the JSC paper there were about over 4,000 cases last year alone where magistrates had sufficient sentencing powers to address the case and address it swiftly. People opted for a jury trial, in some cases deliberately because they wanted to drag it out, put their victim through that, see witnesses pull out, and perhaps get away with it all. That is simply not fair. So what we have to guarantee, especially for the most serious cases, for rape, for murder, for serious drug trafficking, we have to guarantee jury trial in those cases. But what I'm not prepared to do is to ask a victim of rape waiting years for her day in court to get behind the queue for someone who's perhaps stolen a Mars bar because he or she elects for a jury trial and drags the matter out. That's simply not fair. That's simply not British justice.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is yet another attempt by a Labour government to limit trial by jury. Can I remind the Minister that Tony Blair's administration brought forward very similar proposals, and in 2007, after a defeat in the House of Lords, they acknowledged defeat. Can the Minister acknowledge that she too will have to admit defeat?
No way. What I would say is this: the context that we are in is fundamentally different. A context where we have record and rising backlogs of now hitting 80,000 cases. And I would say this to those opposite, many of whom have raised questions on a similar theme. What I didn't hear in a single comment or question was any solutions. Very good at saying what they don't want, wrapping themselves in selective quotes from Magna Carta, but not a single answer. They had 14 years. They had 14 years to fix the backlogs. And what did? They buried their head in the sand. Neglect, underinvestment, and they watched idly by whilst that backlog escalated. I tell you what, I'm not prepared to do the same.
Jim Shannon's got the answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for her answers? However, it is confusing just why this proposed decision has been considered. And I referred to Northern Ireland. The Minister was talking about solutions. Over 99% of Crown Court cases in Northern Ireland are heard by jury, and only in exceptional cases is a jury not used or heard. So this continues to take place in Northern Ireland. A jury represents normal citizens, gives them a say in the democratic process. What assessment has been made on how this decision could impact on public perception and undermine the civic duty of the normal person, which will ultimately concentrate power in the state and reduce the societal values that we all represent and wish to retain?
The Right Honourable Gentleman, as so typical of him, puts his question very well. I agree the British public does have confidence in jury trials, and rightly so. It is a cornerstone of British justice and will remain so, whatever the exact nature of the plans that we bring forward to this House. But what isn't fair, as I've said, is asking victims to wait years for their day in court, undermining the fairness of the trial in so doing. We've got to be mindful of the confidence that British people have in the outcomes of this. It's why we asked an independent expert to look at this. It's why we've looked at independent international comparisons. In Canada, for example, a common law jurisdiction and society not so distinct from our own, I went to meet with judges and visit the courts there. There they use types of judge-only trial, and they don't see any difference in the quality of justice that is delivered and the outcomes. But that's why we've got to take an evidence-based approach, and it's why we're considering this quite as carefully as we are.
Could I just gently say to the Minister, her anger is quite rightly at this leak, and her frustration is there. The answer might be to put confidence back into the system. There is a leak inquiry.
Yes, it is.
Take that on board. Right, let us move on. Let the front benches change over.